Afternoon, folks. Welcome to the Daily Politics. Boris Johnson hits the election campaign with a warning that Jeremy Corbyn is not just a mutton-headed mugwump, but has the Foreign Secretary undermined his own credibility with the attack. Tensions are high on the Korean Peninsula, but the US says it wants to bring the North Korean leader to his senses, not to his knees. We'll ask one of Donald Trump's advisors what that means. Zach's back, but other prospective candidates are sacked. We'll bring you all the latest with the Daily Politics desk of election news. And Parliament shuts up shop today in a quintessentially British way, in Norman French.
Appropriation Number 2 Act.
La Reine remercie, c'est bon sujet.
Obviously, all this coverage of the French elections is catching on. Anyway, all that's coming up in the next hour. With us for the duration today, someone who's well used to hearing Norman French as a member of the House of Lords, Conservative peer Sayido Vazi. So, for the first time since Theresa May called the election, Boris Johnson has been deployed this morning. Writing in The Sun, the Foreign Secretary launched a personal attack on Jeremy Corbyn, referring to him as a mutton-headed old mugwump. Dictionary tells you a mugwump is someone who remains aloof and independent from party politics. It actually comes from the 1886 American presidential campaign, where Republicans left their candidate Blaine and put their support behind Grover Cleveland, who won, the first Democrat to win the presidential election since the end of the US Civil War. They became known as mugwumps. What that has to do with Mr. Corbyn, I have no idea. Anyway, having suggested that Britain's security would not be safe in Mr. Corbyn's hands, Mr. Johnson was asked to clarify the government's own position on supporting US action in Syria.
I think it would be very difficult if the United States has a proposal to have some sort of action in response to a chemical weapons attack. And if they come to us and ask for our support, whether it's with submarine-based cruise missiles in the Med or whatever it happens to be, as was the case back in 2013, John, it would be, in my view, and I know this is also the view of the Prime Minister, it would be very difficult for us to say no.
It would be very difficult to say no. What do you make of that?
Well, we'd have to know what we were saying yes to. I've always looked, Syria's been going on since 2011. We've had a chemical attack before in 2013. We've had a policy where we've consistently said Assad must go, but he's still there. And in 2017, we need to be really careful because the US hasn't made it clear what the strike was about and what next.
Yes, what the strategy or the end game was.
Exactly. I mean, look, targeted strikes are important because it could be part of a strategy to get Assad to the negotiation table. But the fact that we haven't heard since that strike what it is the US are trying to achieve, I mean, they haven't been saying Assad must go in the way that we have in recent times. The relationship between them and Russia, of course, impacts on what happens in Syria. So I think we can't just say yes, we have to say why.
He also seemed to muddy the waters a bit in that if such a decision was required, he said it would be up to the Prime Minister to decide, whereas recent practice, if I can put it that way, has been to go to Parliament on these matters. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that it's not entirely clear what the convention is.
Because before they didn't go to Parliament.
Of course, and the Prime Minister does have absolute right to commit our troops without, and sometimes the element of surprise is what is necessary. I think because of what has happened in recent times, I think before we commit our troops, I think Prime Ministers do come back to the House, and I would presume that Theresa May would follow that.
Is there a distinction, do you think, in going to the Commons on this, to committing troops as opposed to firing cruise missiles from submarines in the Med?
I suppose our young men and women are not at risk in the same way if we were to put troops on the ground. But I still go back to this question. What is it that we're trying to achieve as an international community? And what is it that Britain would bring to that coalition which makes it necessary for us to be involved? And I think those questions are certainly questions that need to go before Parliament.
Is Jeremy Corbyn a mutton-headed old mugwump?
This is just Boris being Boris, isn't it? Look, Jeremy Corbyn is an ineffective leader of the Labour Party, which is what he has shown, which means he can never be an effective Prime Minister. And Jeremy Corbyn, without sounding ultra confident, is not going to be Prime Minister. I just don't think we need to resort to personal attacks on him. It's obvious that he can't run a political party, and he's not going to be able to run the country.
And using the phrase mutton-headed old mugwump, which, other than the alliteration, I'm not really sure what the purpose of that phrase is. Well,
I don't know what it means. I had to go and look it up.
That's being personal, do you think?
I just don't... look, it's something that I felt really uncomfortable with when I was party chairman. I don't think we need to resort to personal attacks, and certainly not in the current general election where we're so far ahead in the polls. It's clear from everything that's coming back that, the question is not whether or not Theresa May is going to be Prime Minister, it's what the size of her majority is going to be. And if that's the case, I think what we should do is get on with telling the country what it is, that the mandate that we want, how we're going to govern, the policies that are important to us, publish our manifesto, and we just need to let, Jeremy can damage himself. We don't need to damage him.
How big a part should Mr. Johnson play in the campaign? Is he an asset to your party or a loose cannon?
I suppose it depends on the kind of campaign that we want to run. He certainly gets a lot of attention, and a lot of people like him, and he has huge face and name recognition, and it certainly provides, entertainment and light-heartedness to some campaigns. But I think Theresa wants to run this as quite a serious campaign, and it is a serious time. The reason why the election's being called is because we're going into some serious negotiations.
And
I
he's
think
the Foreign
therefore
Secretary.
we should be. But Boris is always Boris, whether he's Foreign Secretary or Mayor of London. I have a lot of time for him. I think he's a great guy and he's fantastic to listen to. I just don't think that this election requires us to have any personal attacks on anybody.
Well, at least it brought mugwump back into the political lexicon again. It hasn't been used for a long while, even in the United States.
And we all really missed it, didn't we?
I missed it, actually, but that's only me. Now, another morning, another party leader is out on the campaign trail. This morning, Mr Corbyn took to the streets of Harlow in Essex. Labour's focus today is on housing, very little actual concrete policy. They tell us we'll have to wait for the manifesto on May the 15th for the actual detail. But this morning, as they visited voters, Jeremy Corbyn reiterated his pledge to build 100,000 affordable council and housing association homes. That's just in England, 100,000 a year to rent and to buy. They've also claimed that Labour-led councils build more homes than Conservative-led councils. This is what Jeremy Corbyn had to say.
A Labour government won't stand by and watch the housing crisis get worse. We will build 1 million homes over the period of a parliament, half of which will be council and housing association for rent and be totally affordable, because that is the Labour way. We want our country properly housed. We want our young people growing up with security so they can achieve more in school, in college, and go on to university.
Mr Corbyn in Harlow. We can now speak to Labour's Jack Dromney, who's in Birmingham. Mr Dromney, welcome back to the programme.
Yeah.
So just an aspiration here, no policy.
It's a firm commitment to build 1 million homes a year, and half of those...
No, not 1 million a year, Mr Dromney, not 1 million a year.
I beg your pardon, 1 million over a 5-year period. And half of those annually, homes built by councils and housing associations, both to rent and to buy. And it's a very welcome commitment because we are engulfed, Andrew, by the biggest housing crisis in a generation. Now, no government has done enough, to be absolutely frank, but our record was so much better. We built 2 million new homes, 1 million more homeowners. Now home ownership is falling for the first time since the 1920s. We brought up to standard the 1.8 million council and social homes. We slashed homelessness. And when we had the financial crisis back in 2008, I know because I worked with John Healey when he was then the housing minister, and I was deputy general secretary of my union. We worked together to put a programme together, the Kickstart programme, which saw 120,000 homes built, 130,000 building workers kept in a job, and avoided the collapse of the construction industry. So our record is one that we're proud of.
Let's come on to your record. Why should we believe a firm commitment from you to build 200,000 new homes a year when you never succeeded in doing that in the 13 years you were in power?
Because that's what the country now demands. If you've got...
But you didn't do it before.
Well, in the way that I've described, we had a very good track record, but I also
never built 200,000 homes a year.
Andrew, I also made it clear no government has ever done enough. The question is, who has got the determination to build the homes, affordable homes to rent and buy that the country wants. And the idea that you have a generation now growing up in 20s, 30s, often into their 40s, have to stay at home with mum and dad or in costly, insecure private rented sector accommodation. It's plain wrong, and therefore it will be one of our top priorities. Not just the homes that people want, but the jobs it creates. And also, if you have good homes, then that helps, by the way, to improve people's health, because damp and overcrowded homes damage health. So it's an utter determination that what we're going to do is to tackle that housing crisis.
But you will understand the only way that we can judge this determination is to look at your past record. It's the only thing we have to go on, because we've got no details of the policy of how you're going to do this. So let me ask you this. You're talking about 100,000 new social housing, council housing, housing association a year as part of the mix. In the total 13 years you were in power, how many council houses did you build?
Not enough.
How many?
Not enough.
Well, I'll tell you how many.
But what
you built 7,870. You built 7,870 in 13 years. But you expect us to believe you're going to build 100,000 a year now.
But we inherited from a Conservative government, when we came to power in 1997, social housing stock in this country that was an absolute scandal. Damp homes, badly heated homes, and what we did was to make a decision that with those already in those homes, we had to bring them up to standard, and it's transformed the lives of millions of people. Now, straight answer to your question, did we build enough new social homes? No, we didn't. But then if you look at what's happening now, and the point that John Healey made today, is that if you live in an area where you have a Labour council, you see 50% more homes being built by that Labour council. And here I am in Birmingham, where we're getting now close to 3,000 homes a year, a third of those being built by Birmingham City Council.
A leading Labour member of the London Assembly says that Labour should apologise for its record on council housing in government.
I've made it clear. No government has ever done enough.
No, he's saying you should apologise. He said more council homes were built in the last year of Thatcher's government. Let's just listen to this, given your firm commitment. Yeah. More council homes were built in the last year of the Thatcher government than were built in 13 years of a Labour government.
But the Thatcher government and a major government that then left us with a mess of the best part of 2 million social homes, most of them in disrepair, many of them in serious disrepair. We acted to put that right. That was our priority. Should there be more council homes, social homes built? Yes, without doubt. But then that's why I make the point. Look at the record now of what Labour councils do compared to Conservative councils. You know, we build homes. They don't build homes anywhere near far enough or fast enough.
100,000 new social homes a year. How will you pay for that?
Both by way of direct investment, but also intelligent arrangements. When I was Shadow Housing Minister, I worked very closely, for example, with the housing associations, where what they built, and I've seen it here in my own constituency of Erdington, the Abbeyfields estate, working together with housing associations, but also Birmingham City Council. We've got mixed housing, which I believe in, by the way, Andrew, no longer council's estates.
I understand that, but how would you, where will the money come from?
Mixed housing to rent and buy. So that on a very basic level, what you do is to have an estate where you have different people, different backgrounds, all living together, and some people buy, and that then helps you to build homes for social rent. So it's a combination of investment and that kind of intelligent mixed community building that generates the money necessary. But here in Birmingham, we've now got something called the Brummie Bond, where what we've got is private sector companies who are wanting to invest in a new social housing programme in mixed tenure estates in the way that I've described. And we've also got a Chinese company, Country Garden, that said it's going to invest £2 billion in housing here in Birmingham. So if you've got the will, there's a way.
Have you costed 100,000 new social houses?
Yes, we have, and you will see that in our manifesto.
You can tell me this morning, this afternoon?
I've given you a very strong steer about how we do it. It is a combination of direct investment, and this government has been cutting back investment in social housing, and that's why housing associations and councils, I have to say councils of all political persuasion, have been complaining bitterly about what the government is doing. So it's a combination, therefore, of investment in social housing with that kind of intelligent approach which levers in investment from the private sector in building mixed community areas and estates.
Just one final question. Mr. Corbyn campaigned for the Labour leadership on rent controls. Will rent controls feature in the Labour manifesto?
We are certainly going to act on what is a chronic problem of insecurity in the private rented sector, often poor accommodation in the private rented sector, and soaring and unpredictable rents. That will be...
Will there be rent controls?
That will be, again, at the heart of our manifesto.
Will there be rent controls?
You will see what we say, Andrew, in our manifesto.
I'll try one more time. Will there be rent controls or not? Mr. Corbyn's in favour of them. Will they feature in Labour's manifesto?
Wait and see our manifesto. We will transform the private rented sector in the best interests of private tenants, number one, good landlords, of which there are many, many, many in this country, number two, but also tackling bad landlords, number three. A more secure, higher quality private rented sector so that people who rent are in decent accommodation, a price they can afford.
I think we'll leave it there, Mr. Drobny, because you're not answering my question, and all I'm getting is just rhetoric instead. So I think
you're getting answers, Andrew. You're getting answers.
I tell you, that's the one thing I'm not getting. But never mind. Always a pleasure to discuss these matters with you, Jack Drobny in Birmingham. Housing is a problem, a big problem. This Conservative government has been in power now for into its 7th year, and you're still way short of 200,000 new homes a year.
We are. I mean, I think the last figures were 190,000. We think that the figure should be 200
Not as high as that.
25.
I think that was UK overall. Less than England.
Yeah, 2015-16, I think the figures were 190,000, but you'll have to correct me as to what specific area that related to. But we have said that we have to be building between 225 to about 275,000 houses, new additions a year. So it's not just building new houses, but conversions as well. But I think where I agree with Jack is that successive governments, I mean, the fact that we're talking back to the Thatcher years as to when council housing was being built, successive governments have failed to keep up with demand and have failed to keep up with the needs of Britain. Starts
in England have been around 142,000 in the past 2 years.
Right. I mean, I was looking at some figures this morning, and the latest figures I had for 2015-16 were 190,000. I was comparing them to the last Labour figures that we had.
You might find that's for the UK as a whole.
Right, 130,000.
OK. Now, it's a truism in politics that one campaigns in poetry but governs in prose. At least a former governor of New York State said that. Your view of Donald Trump's campaign rhetoric may have you doubting the timeless quality of his remark. So as we reach the 100th day of Mr. Trump's presidency, perhaps he ought to chew over another maxim, one put forward by a British Prime Minister, that events, dear boy, events are the things most likely to blow a government off course. And like so many occupants of the Oval Office before him, Mr. Trump's been buffeted by cold political winds from the Korean Peninsula. Tensions have risen in Northeast Asia amid concerns over new nuclear weapons tests conducted by North Korea. Washington, Beijing and Seoul believe that North Korea could very soon have nuclear weapons with intercontinental capability in terms of the delivery, meaning they could be used to target cities in the United States, particularly on the West Coast. North Korea says it'll, quote, never stop testing nuclear weapons so long as the US continues alleged, quote, acts of aggression. Well, US Vice President Mike Pence promised his country would meet any North Korean aggression with an overwhelming military response. In an unprecedented move, Donald Trump invited all 100 US senators to a White House briefing to discuss the situation. But the rhetoric from Washington appears to have been dialed down, with the US military commander in the Pacific Theater saying they want to bring Kim Jong-un to his senses, not to his knees. We're joined now to discuss this by Sebastian Gorka. He's Deputy Assistant Strategist in the White House. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you.
Bring the Korean dictator to his senses, not to his knees. What would that mean in policy terms?
Well, one thing about this administration is we don't tend to give away our playbook in advance. But I think if you look at the events of the last 3 weeks, it's very clear that we've sent a message to several nations that have client states that they have to draw their own internal red lines for what kind of behavior they will countenance from those client states, whether it is Russia with Syria or whether it is China with North Korea. North Korea will not be solved in bilateral discussions. It's not a normal nation. So right now, I think the Mar-a-Lago summit with Xi Jinping, the results of that summit, especially the turnaround of the Korean coal shipment, tells you that things are going in the right direction.
What do you expect China to do?
North Korea relies upon China. It is isolated from the global economy, and China has a lot of leverage. So China can exercise that economic and political leverage.
But what's the game here? What do you want China to do?
The game's a very simple one. North Korea has to stop taking actions that are destabilizing to the region and stop behaving in a way that is in material breach of numerous international requirements with regards to weapons of mass destruction programs and ballistic missiles.
And what indications do you have that China is prepared to use its leverage in that direction?
I think the most obvious one is what happened with that coal shipment. But beyond that, we're not going to force our hand or Beijing's hand. So this is delicate stuff, very delicate stuff. Because remember, this is a nation that is more Stalinist than Joseph Stalin's USSR was. And as such, it's not your normal actor, let's put it like that.
The British Foreign Secretary said today that military options are, quote, not the way forward and risk, quote, huge and hideous reprisals. What do you say to that?
I say what the president has demonstrated in the last 14 weeks is that statecraft is never a univalent function. You never solve problems by saying there's only one way of solving things. Diplomacy without the option for the use of force is just words and pieces of paper. A statecraft requires the application of all the tools of statecraft, all the instruments of power at the right time. That is why we sent a very clear message. It's not about leading from behind. It's not just about meetings in Geneva or Vienna. It's about the option, should it be required, to use other tools as well.
So what was that clear message?
That America is back and that there are red lines and we will execute on
What is the red line?
Well, in recent weeks, it's the use of prohibited weapons against innocent women and children.
But in North Korea, what's the red line?
Again, we don't give our playbook away.
But you said you'd made it very clear, but it's not.
We've made it clear at a political level, but we're not going to talk about the tactical or operational theatre triggers. That's what the Obama administration did with Mosul. It's what the Clinton administration did with the Balkans. If you broadcast on Claire all of your potential triggers, well, then those will be used against you.
One Republican senator after the White House briefing said that it, quote, lacked even straight answers on what the policy is regarding North Korea and its testing of ICBMs.
I would disagree.
But you weren't there.
If he's making a discussion, a comment about an unclassified meeting, then I would disagree.
But what is the policy on ICBMs? If the North Koreans continue to test missiles, to give them an ICBM capability, and with that capability they're able to miniaturize the nuclear weapons so that they could nuclearize an ICBM. If they continue down that road, if Chinese pressure either doesn't happen or doesn't deter them, what's the American reaction?
Again, we do not show our cards to the players at the poker table. But the Vice President was very clear in his tour of Asia last week. The capacity to inflict physical damage on our allies or partners or our nation will not be countenanced. How we will get to that point, whether it will be through multilateral diplomacy behind the scenes, second track, third track negotiations, the use of force in some demonstrable fashion to send a message, these are all options on the table, but we will not declare what those options will be at a certain time.
Do you accept, though, that if there was a military response to undermine or destroy North Korea's ICBM capabilities, that the price would be a rain of fire on the South Korean capital?
Well, look, everybody knows that geography is destiny, and you know the distance between...
It's about 70 miles, I think, isn't it?
Exactly. But
and the North Koreans
the artillery
have
is there.
Massive artillery.
Massive, yeah.
To hit a modern big population, westernized
Right.
city.
Nevertheless, there are numerous other tools that can be used. I'm not going to comment, I'm not going to confirm or deny, but there have been stories about why that recent test failed. It didn't fail because a bomb was dropped on the missile launch pad. It failed for other reasons. So
US cyber warfare reasons.
is one theory that I'm not going to comment on.
Well, you raised it.
No, but I'm not going to confirm or deny it.
When the US administration launched the cruise missiles on the Syrian airfield after
Yes.
the gas attacks, that you could see that in terms of a punishment act for what had been done by the Assad regime. But what's the strategy behind it?
What's the strategy? Very similar to what we're doing in North Korea. Assad's regime has significant sponsors. One of them is Russia. And we sent a message that you may want to reconsider just how far your sponsorship goes when you have a satrapy, when you have a client that is prepared to use chemical weapons against its own citizens. That is a strategic response. And as you saw with regards to Secretary Tillerson's cancelled meeting with Vladimir Putin and the volte-face that led to that meeting, the desired effects of that use of force were arrived at.
But what's been different about Russian actions in Syria since the attack?
It's not actions in Syria. It's clearly their reassessment of just how deep and how far that relationship will go, and their openness to talk to our cabinet members on these issues.
But I just don't know what's changed on the ground since that attack. I mean, within 24 hours, the Syrian Air Force was taking off from that very airfield and hitting civilian areas which were deemed to be rebels. So what changed? And by the way, why did 59 cruise missiles do so little damage?
What were those aircraft? You need to have a look at those. Those were pre-fueled. They didn't even have the capacity to fuel those aircraft. So it was smoke and mirrors. What has changed in almost every interview I give, I have to remind people, this is week 14, not month 14 of the administration. So, patience is also, a virtue.
What do you make of what you've heard, Saeed Abbasi?
Well, it goes back to the questions I was asking at the beginning. What is the strategy? And, what we're kind of hearing is, well, there is a strategy. We're not going to tell anybody what that strategy is. We're not really going to deny or confirm what the strategy is. And I think as international partners, as somebody who sat in the, Foreign Office for 2.5 years, if we're going to commit to supporting strategies, well, we need to know what is going on. And I think even in relation to Syria, it was obvious that we didn't know what was going on until it happened.
In World War II, what did we do with regards to the Third Reich? Did we advertise our strategies? In fact, we did the opposite. We convinced Hitler that we were coming over in Calais, not in fact coming over on the beaches of Normandy. That's strategic action.
Well, actually, that was a tactic. What we did in terms of strategy was leave nobody in any doubt that we were going for the total destruction of Nazi Germany.
Yeah, but
that was the strategy, and nobody was in any doubt.
How we were going to achieve
no, but we knew what the end game was.
That's an objective, not a strategy. Don't mix your
terms. And the
terms.
discussion between allies was very clear as to what the strategy was during the Second World War. I think, look, ultimately, there is no doubt in anybody's mind that Assad has committed the most vile murders and acts in his in his own country.
He's still there.
But he's still there, and we've been saying since 2011, Assad must go. I'm not even sure what the US policy is now on whether Assad must or mustn't go. I mean, that hasn't even been clarified.
We don't have what the Obama administration had, which is an article of faith that he must go. We're going to deal with the people who support him because it has to be. Look, the bottom line is the killing has to stop. You asked about the difference between strategies and objectives. Our objective is the killing has to stop. What the permutation is for that, who's in power, that will be a political function, a political process.
All right, we'll leave it there, but it's good to talk to you, Sebastian.
Thank you.
Now it's a snap general election, so the parties have had to work at breakneck speed to select candidates. But don't worry, our Ellie's been keeping up with it and has all the details of those and more besides, with the Daily Politics desk of election news.
Yeah, and here it is. Welcome. With a hastily erected sign, we've got a chair and a computer. So what more could you want? So today we've been getting more details of who's actually going to fight this election, and it's a blast from the Tory past. Esther McVey, remember her? Well, she's been selected to fight George Osborne's old seat. He is delighted, tweeting this morning that she's a one-woman northern powerhouse. Down south, Zach is back. Mr Goldsmith dramatically resigned his Tory seat last year in protest to Heathrow expansion and then promptly lost his seat to the Lib Dems. Well, once again, he is now the Tory candidate.
It's a practical decision, who is most likely to win this campaign, and on that basis, people have made the decision they've made. I think it's the right decision. I wouldn't have put my hat in the ring if I didn't.
Over to UKIP, and the leader, Paul Nuttall, is once again in the headlines, this time for seeming to compare UKIP to Gandhi. He wrote in the Express and Star that his party and its integration manifesto was a decade ahead of its time. It's a bit like the Gandhi thing, he said. First they laugh at you, then they attack you, and then you win. We don't know if he's planning to stand in the coming election. Elsewhere, Tim Farron and the Lib Dems have been on the campaign trail in Cambridge this morning. This is what he said.
Can you smell my spaniel, maybe? All right, how are you? Good to see you.
Smell my spaniel. Not sure what he was talking about there, but maybe it is a new Lib Dem slogan. Elsewhere, we've also been hearing from Jeremy Corbyn. As we've been hearing this morning, he's been in Harlow, keen not to turn his back on people there. He's certainly been fronting up to the electorate in a campaign stump speech. Got there in the end. Labour may be cheered by some diverse and high-profile support from the snooker community today. Ronnie O'Sullivan yesterday tweeted his support for Jeremy Corbyn before going on to get knocked out of the World Championships. And here's one for you, Andrew. I know you're into your grime. For everybody else, that's music that's a mixture of hip-hop, garage and jungle. Jeremy Corbyn, or should I say JC, has got the backing of the grime artist JME. And I think I can use my high-tech studio to just do this.
Before I start top lip slapping, think me and Skepta were born rapping, born in the ends, move through in the ends, and that's...
Yeah, I think we better get out of that before we get too sweary. One last piece of news today, Andrew, is that we have heard that there will be a state opening of Parliament on the 19th of June with a Queen's speech for whoever wins.
Thanks, Ellie. Thanks for playing one of my more recent recordings. Now, the government has a strategy to stop people becoming terrorists or supporting terrorism. It's called PREVENT. It's received enormous scrutiny over the years and is now in the middle of yet another revamp. In a moment, we'll hear from our guest of the day, Saida Vase, on this. But first, Emma Vardy looks back at the development of PREVENT in a city that found itself unexpectedly in the spotlight.
In 2013, 6 young Muslim men from Portsmouth travelled in secret to Syria. Initially, some believed this to be for humanitarian work. But ISIS began to emerge as a sinister extremist organisation. The realisation that 6 friends from Portsmouth had gone to join them was a huge shock for the local community. A police team from Special Branch began carrying out PREVENT work in the city. Officers built new relationships with leaders at the city's mosques and with local Muslim families. They urged people, especially mothers, to speak up if they felt their children may be being radicalised.
We really need families and school teachers and nurses and doctors to tell us about their concerns long before someone goes on to become a jihadi bride or someone that's committing a criminal act.
They had their work cut out. The city also had increasing problems with right-wing extremism. The English Defence League targeted Portsmouth's largest mosque.
We've noticed that a lot of people that go to Syria actually come from this mosque. So.
But what sort of stereotypical views do we think of when we think of a terrorist?
PREVENT officers in Portsmouth brought the fight against radicalisation into the classroom, beginning a new programme visiting local schools.
I think the goal is for students to understand what violent extremism is. We want to get our message across that, as far as possible, we don't want to criminalise anybody.
They engaged with thousands of young people, discouraging travel to Syria, but also discouraging radicalisation towards the far right. It was one of the first cities in the UK where PREVENT was being used extensively to discourage radicalisation of all kinds. The PREVENT statutory duty prompted a significant step forward in the delivery of PREVENT work across all public sector organisations. Now, social workers, healthcare staff and teachers had a duty to report concerns over extremism. Hundreds of frontline staff in Portsmouth received training on radicalisation. It prompted criticism that ordinary workers were being asked to spy on people in their care, something repeatedly refuted by those who work with the PREVENT strategy. Responsibility for PREVENT was transferred from the police to Portsmouth City Council.
The main part of our role is through education, so keeping people safe. We talk about British values, so challenging extremism through promoting democracy, freedom of speech.
Today, if someone raises concerns about someone who may be being drawn into extremism, Portsmouth City Council's PREVENT team will carry out intervention work if they believe it is needed. The process is usually kept highly confidential, but PREVENT teams are keen to stress they see their work primarily as safeguarding vulnerable people.
And the long-term solution has to be in the counter-extremism strategy, where civil societies come together and take on this ideological challenge in the same way that we've been challenging homophobia, racism and fascism. That has to be the future, and I believe that's something that we will see moving forward.
No one else from Portsmouth has since been known to have travelled to Syria, but authorities believe their counter-extremism work must continue.
Now, our guest of the day, Sayeeda Vassi, is a long-standing critic of the PREVENT programme. She's just written a book called The Enemy Within about Islam in Britain. What is the evidence that PREVENT has lost the confidence of the Muslim community?
Well, first of all, I've not been a long-standing critic of the PREVENT strategy. I mean, I called it brave, dynamic and cutting edge when it started off in 2003 and when it was first published in 2006. And the concern that I have is that over the years, and you just have to look at the way in which it's written as a strategy, the iterations of it have changed. And what started off as a genuine, as you heard from Harris Rafiq there, from Quilliam, a genuine battle of ideas led by the community, an upstreet prevention of trying to stop people getting into terrorism, has actually ended up being a policy which has had concerns raised from across the board. I mean, people like Rights Watch, Helena Kennedy, Michael Mansfield QC, the George Soros Foundation, even David Anderson, the independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, has said it is time to independently review PREVENT.
But it is reviewed a lot and is currently being reviewed at the moment. My question was, what's the evidence that it's lost the confidence of the Muslim community?
Well, like I said, there are a plethora of reports out there where members of the Muslim community have taken part, given evidence. I can give you my own evidence of people who are consistently ringing me up, parents, teachers who are concerned about the level of training, the training material, the people who are trained to train others, the number of referrals, the opaqueness about all of this. So I think what we're saying, those of us who want PREVENT to work, is to say it's time for an independent review. And I think the fact that the government is digging its heels in, not prepared to have an independent review, not putting into the public domain so much of what can be quite non-contentious material, and the opaqueness of the whole strategy, I think, is raising deep concerns.
Asid Sadiq, when he said this 2 years ago, was the president of the National Association of Muslim Police. PREVENT has moved on a lot. There were some teething problems. It's now moving in the right direction. PREVENT is working quite well. It has made a difference. We've made a lot of progress.
Look, for every quote that for somebody who thinks PREVENT... There are two sides to this argument, Andrew. You have those at one end who think, let's get rid of PREVENT, trash it all the time. There are others who say, it's working, let's double down on it. The reality is somewhere in the middle. The reality is that some bits of it have worked, other bits haven't. And for me, the way if I took this as a very personal thing, it's the kind of space where if I had concerns about my children, I should be able to take them there, feel that it was a non-securitized place, it was something that wouldn't impact on the rest of their lives, and we would get genuine support. It's not that kind of place. It's not the space where people feel parents can refer their children, and it should be.
Some are suspicious, though, that PREVENT is being undermined by deliberate strategy by reactionary forces in the Muslim community.
I agree with that. There is definitely a lobby out there which wants to do nothing but trash PREVENT. But then the other side of the argument is some believe that if PREVENT is such a great policy and is working so well,
but no one's really claiming that.
Well, the government has consistently said it's a good policy and it's working, and we're going to double down on it and invest more in it. But has openly said it doesn't apply in Northern Ireland. I mean, there was a question in Parliament not so long ago when a member of Parliament said, yes, but we were told that PREVENT doesn't really apply to counter-terrorism and counter-extremism. It applies to Muslim communities.
But they have
And I
other
think
programmes in
these
Northern
questions-
Ireland, as you know, because this has been these similar issues have been a problem in Northern Ireland for decades and decades. There are different ways of approaching it there.
And PREVENT is seen as the golden standard. And in fact, we're exporting it to other parts of the world. So I think because there are these questions, the fact that there is this debate, Andrew, what I'm saying is let's have an independent review of this. Let's have somebody like David Anderson, a well-respected lawyer, come in and review all of this, somebody who's got great expertise in this. And let's have everybody who has these concerns give evidence and hopefully emerge from this a stronger programme, which a lot of us can get behind and support.
You write in your book that there's a disproportionate focus on Islamist-related terrorism. Why would there not be a disproportionate focus on it?
I don't think I write there's a disproportionate focus on. I mean, have you read the book? I'd like to know which.
No, I've just seen a summary.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, what I say in the book is that there is a policy at the moment which has a definition for Islamist extremism, a definition which actually, in my view, and according to many other experts, is fundamentally flawed. But we don't have a definition of any other form of extremism or terrorism. And if you look at the figures, and this is what one of the things I talk about in the book, you see these arguments, unfortunately, are far too complex to be dealt with in a kind of 30-second soundbite. It's why I went away and wrote a book about it.
But what is not complex is the fact that the overwhelming terrorist threat to us is Islamist.
And that is a fact.
So that is what we should be focusing on.
We should be. But what I'm saying is, if you look at the definition of Islamist extremism as it stands, I mean, if you look at what it is that we're looking for the telltale signs of what makes a terrorist. The telltale signs are anything between 15 to about 30. And this is borne out by the evidence of people who've studied the lives and the profiles of people who have been involved in terrorist attacks. And yet, despite these 15 to 30 different telltale signs, government policy focuses on one. That worries me. It should worry us all that we have a counter-terrorism strategy which defines and details and follows a definition which doesn't encompass all the telltale signs of what makes a terrorist.
Do you think it was wrong for the government to want people to ascribe to British values?
I don't think that. What I say about British values is it's a list which is reductive. What we should be talking about is British ideals. What is Britain? What should Britain be in 2017? When we talk about British values, and I unpick this again in the book, what we cite as British values are the very values that we break in policy making. And I give example after example of where we say, these are our values, but in policy making and implementation, we fail to follow those very values. And so for me, what I'm saying is we need a much more honest debate about what Britain wants to be in 2017. And when we've had that debate, we have a set of British ideals to which we can all sign up. And that includes government. So if we say we believe in X, we should be doing X in the way we make policy.
Is there not a continuing problem, though, of the isolation of some Muslim communities, the growing isolation, the growing parts of our cities, especially in the north, which are now overwhelmingly Muslim, in which they interact purely within themselves and are not in any sense integrated with the rest of society?
Well, one of the things I explore is the diversity amongst British Muslim communities. And I talk about how from ethnicity to theology to class to profession to the way in which they live and where they live, we are, as Muslim communities, we are so diverse. And one of the things that I argue for in this book is to make sure that when we talk about Britain's Muslim communities, we don't see them as this one monolithic block. But one of the things I do...
But they are. There is, I'm not saying this is true in any way of the total diverse, as you said, Muslim community. That's true. And it's more diverse than the French community, which is overwhelmingly from North Africa. Our Muslim community is not. It's from many parts of the world. But there are clearly problems of a lack of in which increase, and it's getting worse, I would suggest, in which some Muslim communities are increasingly isolated from the rest of us.
So one of the things I talk about in here is some Muslim communities, a small section of it, which specifically believes in a kind of separatist, isolationist way. And we have those amongst all communities. I mean, we have a Jewish community, a very Orthodox Jewish community, which lives in a very separatist and separated way. But one of the things that I go back to in this book is that I have a very frank conversation with Britain's Muslim communities. I say to them, look, you are not terrorists. If we were, there are 3 million of us, would have killed everybody. But are we fit for purpose for Britain 2017? And I challenge them to raise their game, which includes saying, how do we make sure we're part of a bigger community? But the one thing we must always bear in mind, Andrew, is this. Integration is a middle-class pastime. You and I don't have a problem with integration because we presumably live in nice houses and send our kids to nice schools and probably go to the same nice resorts for holidays. But actually, if you're at the bottom of the pile, it doesn't matter what colour you are and what religion you are, then unfortunately, integration is not the top of your priority list, it's survival. And I think we have to be really careful of drawing a distinction between those communities that are deliberately choosing to live separate lives and those that live separate lives because they have no choice.
Because of economic circumstances.
Because of economic circumstances.
The book is called The Enemy Within.
A Tale of Muslim Britain.
Tale of Muslim Britain. Now, despite the best attempts of the Lib Dem leader, Tim Farron, to focus attention back on to the UK's relationship with the EU, he's had a bruising couple of days, which have seen him face scrutiny over his views on gay sex and sack a would-be MP over allegations of anti-Semitism. At PMQs, Theresa May criticised the decision to allow David Ward to stand in his old constituency. He had been MP for Bradford East when the Prime Minister was asked by an ex-Bradford councillor called Eric Pickles.
The Prime Minister has shown considerable leadership in adopting the IRA definition of anti-Semitism. Does she believe it's the duty of all party leaders within this House not just to play lip service to it, but to do something about it? And does she share my... Sorry about that. And does she share my disgust that a former member of this House, criticised by the Home Affairs Select Committee for his anti-Semitic utterances, is now the official candidate in Bradford East for the Liberal Democrats?
People will be, I think, rightly disappointed to see the Liberal Democrats re-adopt a candidate with a questionable record on anti-Semitism. It is important that all parties maintain the strongest possible censure on all forms of intolerance and send that message to our communities.
Well, just hours after that broadside, Mr Farron reversed the decision to let David Ward stand for the party on June the 8th. At one stage he said it was nothing to do with him, he was just the party leader and he didn't want to interfere. But he then, a few hours later, described him as, quote, unfit to represent the party. The SAC candidate said he was, quote, stunned and somewhat ashamed of my own party. Close quotes.
This is all part of the plan, isn't it? You know, how do you stop the House of Commons raising issues of Israel? Well, what you do is you make sure that supporters of the Palestinians don't get into the House of Commons and ask awkward questions. And this is the strategy, and it works, doesn't it?
That was Mr Ward, no longer the Lib Dem candidate for Bradford East. To discuss this, we're joined by James Serene, used to work for Nick Clegg, is now the Chief Executive of the Britain-Israel Communications and Research Centre. David Ward said his sacking is designed to stop supporters of the Palestinians being elected. Is he right?
Well, that's absolute nonsense. I mean, people in this country have a very vigorous debate about foreign policy issues. There are lots of debates about Israel and the Palestinians and how to solve that conflict. I mean, that's just a smokescreen that's thrown up by people like David Ward to try and make it seem like he's being silenced. I mean, if he wanted to engage in a sensible debate about Israel and the Palestinians, then he, of course, would have been welcome to do so. But what he did do was engage in a very dark side of that kind of discussion, which quite quickly trips into anti-Semitism. And we mentioned the new definition of anti-Semitism that was talked about in the House. He pretty much ticked every box of the guidance notes of what that definition actually is.
No, I'll come back to that in a minute. So Mr Farron, in your view, was right to sack David Ward?
I believe he was right.
OK, so what, in terms of the definition of anti-Semitism, what is it that Mr Ward has said that was anti-Semitic, as opposed to being very strongly, perhaps even virulently, anti-Israel?
Well, I mean, if you look at the tweets that he's written and the blogs also that he's written, he has various themes. There's a kind of dangerous fantasy about Israel no longer existing or Israel not existing anymore. He supported Naz Shah with this ridiculous comment about Israelis being transferred to America. He equates Israel's treatment of the Palestinians with the Holocaust, which is in the guidance notes of that definition, as something that absolutely should not be done and should be avoided.
He said that if he'd lived in the Gaza Strip, he'd probably fire rockets at Israel too. Now, that is, for a British parliamentarian, I think most people would agree, a stupid thing to say. But is it anti-Semitic?
I wouldn't necessarily think that that particular comment is anti-Semitic, but I think, you know...
He talks then about the apartheid state of Israel. Now, to call Israel an apartheid state is a long-standing meme of those who are very anti-Israel. But is that anti-Semitic as opposed to being, as I say, virulently anti-Israel?
Well, I think there are ways to talk about it, and I think, you know, just that particular comment may or may not be. It depends on the context, and it depends what he's doing. But if you look at the totality of his beliefs and what he has said, there are very clear themes there, which are basically anti-Semitism. They are not trying to have a sensible debate about Israel and the Palestinians. I mean, my entire career is based on sensible discussions in this country about Israel and the Palestinians. What he is doing is not that.
Was Tim Farron right to sack David Ward?
Yes, he was. Because if you look at, I mean, I looked at some of the detailed stuff that he'd said, and what David does is he consistently confuses his very clear opposition to the Israeli government, which I do all the time. The current Israeli administration. I think lots of people within Britain's Jewish communities would have huge concerns about the current Israeli administration, and he confuses that with Jews. And a couple of comments that he's made are about what he feels Jews are doing to Palestinians. Well, yeah, actually, that's where the kind of...
you said that, because I was looking through a lot of the things that he's... I've not been through it all by any means. And a lot of what he said, it seemed to me, well, that you're clearly a real enemy of Israel, but that is not always the same as being anti-Semitic. But then I saw one thing when he said the Jews, not Israel. He said the Jews are inflicting atrocities on Palestinians, and I thought that may have been the use of Jews rather than.
Well, it's an absolute classic meme, as you said, of anti-Semites that they will talk about the Holocaust and talk about Israelis being like Nazis. It's an absolutely classic. It's the most offensive thing that you could possibly do. And you can talk about Israel, you could talk about all sorts of Middle East issues. You don't need to use Nazi imagery to make your point. And it's clearly designed to be offensive. You're back in the Ken Livingstone issue of, like, why defend Naz Shah by talking about Hitler? I mean, it's very transparent, and it's very clear what they're trying to do. And it's not a dog whistle. It's like an air raid siren for these followers. They know what's being talked about, and they jump in on it.
I mean, James is absolutely right. This is exactly one of the things I talk about, because I talk about these issues all the time. And I say, why would you even reach for the Holocaust or Hitler? Why would you? How can these actually be answers to what's happening in the Middle East? And interestingly, what was when Naz Shah said what she did, for which she apologised, and I think she's been brilliant in the way that she's actually dealt with this issue. She actually said, "Yeah, that was a really stupid cartoon. I shouldn't have put it out. Made a mistake." So for anybody to be coming out and supporting a cartoon for which the original MP apologised for, I think in itself was a daft thing to do.
But you've said that British citizens who volunteer to fight in the Israeli army should be treated as foreign fighters and prosecuted on their return to Britain.
What I have said is that if you are British and you want to fight, then you fight for an army and you fight for Britain only. That's a very clear view that I have. And that is whether you are British Pakistani, British Indian, British Israeli, British whatever you may happen to be. I think the law in this area is unclear.
So should they be prosecuted? So if you join the US Army or the French Foreign Legion, if you come back to Britain, you should be prosecuted?
And this is the issue. At the moment, the law is unclear as to who you join and which bit you join and how you're prosecuted when you come back. So I think to clear up all of this and to make it absolutely clear where we stand, if you are British and you want to fight, you fight for the British Armed Forces and you fight for no one else.
OK, we'll leave it there. James Serene, thank you for coming in today. Now, we did ask David Ward to come on the programme, but he declined. Parliament shutting up shop today. Oh, I can hear you say. MPs and peers will not return to their respective debating chambers until after the general election, which is on June the 8th. But it will not be doing so without ceremony. It never does. It's called prorogation. And BBC Parliament's Daniel Britton went behind the scenes of the ceremony in 2015 to explain what it all means.
Black Rod!
Yes, it's prorogation again. The time of year when Parliament is put into a deep sleep until the new session. This time, though, there'll be no fairy godmother to kiss Parliament awake. Instead, with one stroke of her wand, the Wicked Witch will dissolve them all next week, and the MPs will be sent into outer darkness, or the election as it's called.
If you're looking for the heart of the British Constitution, then I think it's here, because sooner or later you're going to find yourself in this hidden away corridor in the Palace of Westminster. It leads to the Crown Office, and I think they keep it deliberately hidden away. And it's here that the final seal is put on our Constitution, literally.
Within this office, on instructions from the business managers in the House, I will prepare this Royal Commission. It deals firstly with the appointment of the Royal Commissioners, and will also give the Commissioners, or any three of them, full power and authority in our name to prorogue and continue our present Parliament. This document will then go to the Queen. She will sign the document at the top at a Privy Council meeting which will be conferred for the purpose. It will then be returned to me and will be dated, sealed with the Great Seal of the realm.
So it is literally signed, sealed and delivered.
Indeed.
Paperwork in place, the show can begin. The peers are gathered in the chamber of the House of Lords. They dispatch Black Rod off to the Commons, collects the Commons, they bring them down here, rabble from the Commons. They go into the chamber of the House of Lords and they meet the Royal Commission. The hat doffing can begin.
Part of the ceremony of prorogation is the giving of royal assent to those bills which await royal assent, and the Clerk of the Crown announces the title of each bill, and then I look at the Commons and use the words of royal assent on behalf of the Queen.
La Reine le Vote.
And that, of course, is done in Norman French.
Deep Sea Mining Act.
La Reine le Vote. That is to say, the Queen wishes it. And we go through the list like that. There are actually two variations on that formula, one of which I shall be using on this occasion. The longest is for what's called supply bills, which are effectively bills granting money to the Crown.
Appropriation Number 2 Act.
La Reine remercie ces bons sujets, accepte la bénévolence et ainsi le vote.
In other words, the Queen thanks her good subjects, accepts their benevolence, and thus wishes it so.
La Reine le Vote.
Is it very different to ordinary French, Norman French?
I'm afraid I know no Norman French other than the words that I use on this occasion.
I thought you all went round sort of chatting in Norman French around here, no?
Would that it were so.
At Her Majesty's command, this royal variety performance is due to end sometime this afternoon. As some would say, La Reine le Vote.
We're joined now from Central Lobby by our parliamentary correspondent, Sean Curran. We're going to conduct this interview entirely in Norman French, but we've run out of time. Just tell me, on this wash-up period, what's got through and what hasn't? What's the government had to junk because of lack of time?
Yeah, there's been a lot of horse trading going on in the last couple of days. Some bills are getting through, as you say. The Northern Ireland bill was rushed through this week. The finance bill enacting Philip Hammond's budget of last month, that's gone through, and just within the last couple of hours you'll be delighted to know a private member's bill on the registration of farriers looks like it's going to make it onto the statute book. Probably the biggest casualty is the Prisons and Courts bill, which was going to overhaul the prison system in England and Wales. That is shelved for now. Obviously, if the Conservatives get back in, then that could be resurrected in the Queen's speech. Parliamentary business will end in a few hours' time. Parliament will be dissolved at 1 minute past midnight on Wednesday, and at that point there are no more MPs. All the people who normally work here are just ordinary citizens with no special privileges. They're just candidates in the election, but they will continue to get paid until polling day.
Oh, well, that's good to know. Sean Curran, thank you very much. 1 o'clock news is starting on BBC One. I'll be joined tonight on BBC One by Michael Portillo, Alan Johnson, Charles Fraser, Helen Lewis, John Nicholson, Sean Berry and Dustin Lance Black. Nope, me neither. Anyway, see you tonight. Bye-bye.